So before I talk about the main subject of my talk, which is sleep itself, I'd like to share a little bit of a personal story. So in November 2023, so just about a year and a half ago, I started having serious stomach issues. And when I went to go visit my doctor to get them checked out, she asked me the general questions about my lifestyle and all that. And eventually, she asked me if I was getting enough sleep at night. Now, this was a question that I was hesitant to answer for many reasons. The first of which being that I wasn't sleeping as well as I should have been. Second, which I don't like to admit, is that I didn't like admitting that I was a problem. But eventually, I gathered the courage and told her that I had been sleeping in a very unconventional manner. 4 hours in the afternoon and 4 hours at nighttime. And my mom, who's actually in the audience right now, was in the corner of the appointment room. And, she was on the edge of her seat just waiting to listen to my doctor lecture me about my sleep problems. Needless to say, that did not happen. And what my doctor told me next came as a shock to me, actually. Instead of telling me that my sleep schedule was a main culprit for all of my health issues, she told me that there actually was very little evidence showing a relationship between sleep cycles like mine and negative impacts on our health. And that if anything, this kind of sleep that I was practicing, as well as other alternative sleep cycles, were becoming new and more efficient ways for people with busy lives to get their 8 hours in. Now, up on the screen here, I have a little bit of a graphic comparing my sleep cycle to what we traditionally think of as sleep. Now, the sleep that many of you in the audience might be practicing is called monophasic sleep. Essentially, monophasic quite literally means one phase, and that's where you take all of those 8 hours of sleep and do it all in one stretch. Now, what I practice is called biphasic sleep, essentially 2 phases. And biphasic sleep goes a little beyond just splitting your sleep into half. If any of you out here actually take a nap after your work schedule or whatever it might be, you're a biphasic sleeper. Now, there's also polyphasic sleep, and that's where a person splits their sleep into more than 2 segments. Now, before I talk about my specific experience with biphasic sleep, I'd like to talk a little bit more just about sleep in general and why it's extremely beneficial for us. Now, up on the screen here with my very professionally done visual, I have a couple of the very important benefits of sleep listed. All right, first, leftmost on the screen, we have fat breakdown and storage. Depending on the regularity of your sleep schedule, as well as how long your sleep lasts, your body efficiently stores fat in various sections of your body. And conversely, there are a lot of studies that show an association between a lack of sleep and weight gain. Next up, we have hormones. Hormones are extremely important for triggering certain responses in your body's cells. And many hormones are produced in your sleeping time. For teens such as myself, as well as kids that are younger than me, a very important hormone that is produced is the growth hormone, which is extremely important for certain stages of development. And on the right side of the screen here, I have what is probably one of the most important benefits of sleep, and that is to our immune system. While you sleep, your immune system essentially does a full body check around all of your cells and looks for infection. And it also produces antibodies that can protect you against harmful bacteria and viruses. Additionally, inflammation is a common immune response that gets lowered when you sleep. Sleep also has all kinds of important benefits for our minds and our brain. For instance, there are 2 specific regions of the brain that I've highlighted up here, the hippocampus, which is towards the middle and inside your brain, and the neocortex, which is more along the surface. And these 2 parts of your brain work together in tandem to store, filter, and alter your memories that you've acquired throughout the day, and consolidate them, and eventually transfer them into your neural networks, where you can restore them and retrieve them in the long term. Second, we have essentially the brain's version of hormones, neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are signaling molecules that cause your brain to produce certain responses to environmental or bodily stimuli. An example of a neurotransmitter very well known is serotonin. Makes you feel happy and alert. And while you sleep, the structures that receive and interpret these neurotransmitters, which are called receptors, regain their sensitivity. So essentially, sleep is not only important for our physical body, but also for our cognitive ability and our ability to respond to what's going on around us. Now, I'd also like to address the other side of this issue, which is the potential risks that can come as a result of lack of sleep. Up at the top here, just as I mentioned before on the immune system, when a person doesn't get enough sleep at night, your immune system hasn't had the chance to produce all those antibodies and develop your defense system. And as a result, I'm sure many of you heard this at some point, people that don't get enough sleep at night tend to get sick more often. And this is why. Next, strain on the heart. When you don't sleep, your risk of having heart attacks and other heart conditions goes up by a large amount. And finally, a higher risk for all kinds of complications. This includes obesity, cardiovascular disease, and heart disease, among many others. And these are just a few of the many, many innumerable effects that can happen to our bodies when we don't sleep. Now, after hearing all these terrible things that can happen when we don't sleep properly, we might temporarily forget, what keeps us busy in the first place? Why are we finding alternative ways to sleep? Why do we forego sleep? And the main reason is being productive at work. Sleep cycles and their alternatives have found their ways into cultures all across the world. For instance, in Spain, there's the concept of a siesta, essentially where between the hours of 2 to 5 p.m., businesses shut down and people go home and sleep or relax or take part in other forms of leisure to get some extra rest throughout the day. Italy has a similar concept called riposo, except that's between the hours of 1 and 4 p.m. Old English literature has references to a first and a second sleep. Essentially, the first sleep is where they first go to bed, and then later on they wake up to tend to their crops or complete other work that they couldn't do throughout the day, and then they take their second sleep. And actually, many agricultural workers, both today and in the past, would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, in the middle of their sleep, to take care of their farm, and then eventually go back to sleep. So this concept of finding alternative sleep cycles to work around the demands of our lives is not necessarily a new concept. But what is new is how much we're learning about how destructive it can be to our bodies. Now, for teens such as myself, a lot of what we're balancing might be jobs, extracurriculars, taking care of younger siblings, and loads of homework. For many of you in the audience who are adults, that might be jobs, financial responsibilities, taking care of family, and so on and so forth. And biphasic sleep, in a way, has helped me and many others that I know, regardless of age, manage these demands of life, but not without the relative costs. As mentioned before, I sleep 4 hours in the afternoon and then 4 at night. And here are some of the benefits that I've found result from my practice of biphasic sleep. First, I find that I tend to get work done much more efficiently when I've had that time to decompress after coming home and taking a nap. Second, I am a person with asthma, and my asthma tends to act up more at nighttime. So if I were to have an attack, it makes it easier to stay awake and treat it and be alert as to how my symptoms are progressing because I had that extra sleep earlier in the day. And finally, emotional stability. After a full day of school or work or whatever it might be, we all tend to get a little bit overwhelmed. And that 4-hour nap makes me much more calm and ready to tackle the next load of work that I have for the day. However, a lot of these benefits don't go unpunished. For instance, having practiced biphasic sleep for almost 4 to 5 years now, I can say that regardless of whether I sleep or not, I tend to feel constantly tired. Additionally, I find that my performance isn't where it should be, meaning on tests or homework or whatever it might be, I tend to make errors that I wouldn't make if I was a little bit more alert. Additionally, as I'm sure many of you can infer, sleeping 4 hours in the afternoon after school makes it a little bit difficult to do extracurriculars and other after-school events that tend to take place at that time. So this ends up not being compatible with certain parts of my school life. And last but not least, illness. I've found that over the past few years, having practiced this new type of sleep, I've begun to become more sick than I did in the past. Now, you all might be wondering, well, you sleep 4 hours in the afternoon, 4 hours in the nighttime. That's 8 in total. What exactly is the issue? And the issue is that sleeping and waking is not this perfect process that starts and ends immediately. Now, there's some of you in the audience who fall asleep as soon as you go to bed. I envy you, but that's not the case with me and for many other people. I'd like to revisit the graphic that I had up on the screen a couple slides ago, comparing monophasic and biphasic and polyphasic sleep, but now with a little bit more reality added into it. And that reality component is the fact that it takes some time for us to fall asleep, and it takes some time for us to get up from that sleep. As a result, dividing your sleep into segments like that, you end up making yourself fall asleep more times and getting up more. And that means you've begun to compromise some time that you could have spent sleeping on making yourself fall asleep and get up. At the right, when you include this time taken to fall asleep and get up, you see that the total amount of sleep that you get when you segment your sleep ends up being less than what it would be if you slept all in one stretch. Additionally, this sleep deprivation also comes as a result of sleep phases and how those work. So sleep isn't this complete one long process that gets stretched out. Sleep happens in phases of 90 minutes. And so about every 1.5 hours, you've finished one cycle of sleep. Now, when you segment your sleep into multiple intervals, you have a much higher risk of waking up in the middle of one of those phases. And when you wake up in the middle of a sleep cycle, you end up extremely tired, more so than you would be if you had finished it. And as a result, because you've done this multiple times, your tiredness tends to be exacerbated throughout the day. Now, these are a few of the effects that both I have felt and are very general to those who face sleep deprivation. So if there are any of you out there who are wondering, I don't sleep like this weirdo on the stage, I actually sleep at night, this still applies to you. So long-term sleep deprivation tends to affect your ability to concentrate and put your full effort into the task at hand. This might be concentrating at work, concentrating at school, or it could also take the form of much more serious things, such as distracted driving. Additionally, a chronic lack of sleep tends to build up and increase your risk of developing stress problems, which go on to decrease your adaptability to situations. You become panicked, and you aren't able to think of creative solutions to the task at hand when it's not something that you have memory of doing. And this trickles down into all kinds of parts of our lives. Now, what can we do about this? Our society demands us to work and work and work, as I'm sure all of you have experienced here. But the reality is that regardless of what our life's demands are, or how our schedule is, or what our responsibilities are, we have to find a balance at some point. For people like me, that might mean transitioning out of biphasic sleep and trying to make that divide a little more drastic and sleep more at night. For some of you, maybe you've had trouble falling asleep at night. And that might mean taking time away from a screen before you go to bed, not drinking a lot of coffee, or turning off all the lights and sleeping in darkness. Whatever it might be, we all need to find a balance. Now, I'd like to leave all of you with one final message, and that's that even if what I'm saying right now doesn't completely resonate with you, or even if it doesn't seem completely realistic, I'm essentially telling you all that unless you sleep perfectly 8 hours a night, that you're going to have this happen to you. Even if that doesn't seem real, the consequences are very much real. All of these issues that I mentioned earlier, sickness, heart problems, and whatnot, they become real very quickly when they start happening. And I myself am already paying the price as I stand talking to you on this stage. So if there's anything I'd have you take away, it's that your body was not simply meant to work. Work was meant to sustain you. Your body is your main priority. And if there's any of you in this audience today who took time away from your responsibilities to come here and listen to all of us speak, I am eternally grateful, first of all. But I would ask of you that don't drink 2 or 3 shots of espresso, stay up until 2 or 3 a.m. and get that work done. Go to bed and give your body the rest that it needs. Thank you.